Book of Job. Last week, if you recall, we talked about Eliphaz. That's one of the first three friends. And we are going through uncharted territory because when in the church we studied the book of Job, or you read the book of Job, you do the first two chapters and then you do the last four chapters. And as the Jews would do, in that middle part, we observe the Passover. Because the first two chapters are narrative, the last four chapters are more or less sort of poetry, but mainly narrative and fun stuff. But that middle part is poetry, and so there's a lot of repetition. Yes, ma'am? Well, let me see. I may be out of sheets. There you go. No problem. I'm sorry. I thought I left an extra one there. Thank you. All right. So Job has lost everything. He's lost his 10 kids. He's lost his possessions. He's lost his reputation. He's lost his health. And so as you are reading through this book, don't think of someone in a very nice, comfortable chair, just really getting philosophical. This is a man that's sitting in the pit of ashes because he needs something to try to dry up all the bodily fluids that are flowing from his boils, his sores. And he's getting a broken pot. He's breaking things so that the things can flow. So you can imagine how miserable he is. And so here comes the three friends. They stay for 7 days, and we all remember that. And then the time comes where we have got to fix Job. All right? You ever have somebody who decides, hey, it's time to fix this person? Right? You ever see that happen? I've seen a lot of people get fixed. Many years ago, when I went to Freed Hardeman, I was an RA over the floor. And I remember on Monday night, about 2 o'clock, I'd hear a vacuum cleaner. And I would think, men's dorm, that doesn't happen unless something's going bad, right? And so I heard it that one week. I waited, heard it the next week. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to investigate. I went down there, and it was a girl. And she was cleaning a guy's bathroom and cleaning his room. Room inspection was the next day, Tuesday. What would happen was the dorm mother would walk through. You had to make up your bed, clean your bathroom, because they know if you leave single men long enough, bad stuff happens. So, once a week, they had made sure and checked on us. This girl had met herself a guy who was a finance major and a guy who was fairly worldly. And she had found him, fell in love with him, and here we go. We're starting to clean his bathroom. We're starting to clean his room. We're starting to take care of things. About 3 weeks later, the guy changes his major to become a Bible major. And I'm thinking, I didn't know he went to church, but he has found the Lord. And she kept working with him and working with him. And today he's a preacher in Nashville and just religious as can be. And everybody thinks, wow, he's a good preacher. He's got somebody behind him who is, helping him along and fixing him. Okay, that's what Eliphaz thinks he's doing here. And Eliphaz comes to Job and he says, okay, Job, divine retribution. That's the theory we have here. And there's a lot of different theories that we're going to run through. They have different names of people who've studied the book of Job. But the idea of divine retribution is there is a math equation to everything. And so 1 + 1 = 2, right? If a man is evil and he sins, God hates sin, so that equals this man's going to get punished. Okay? If a man is good and righteous, God loves us being righteous, and so God is going to bless us. Now, in your mind in the Bible, you're thinking Deuteronomy chapter 28. Because Deuteronomy chapter 28, the end of his sermon, Moses says to Israel, if you keep the covenant, if you behave and you do what God wants you to do, you're going to have full barns, you're going to have lots of crops, lots of cattle, you're going to have a whole lot of children, nobody's going to conquer you, and you will remain as a nation forever. And then he goes to the other side, and he says, if you're unfaithful, your children are going to be sold into slavery. Your wife's going to have something happen to her. You're going to be starving to death. You're going to be carried into captivity, and your nation will be destroyed. And so that's the equation that we read of in the book of Moses, Deuteronomy. That's what we see there. That's what we think today. And so that's why when somebody gets cancer, they say, God, why would you do this to me? That's why when we lose our job, we say, well, what did I ever do to deserve this? And that's why many times when we're looking around at church and we see somebody with a perfect children and a perfect marriage, we think, well, of course that's going to happen because they come to church every Sunday. And since they come to church every Sunday, that's going to happen just right. And it's a great theology because it's comfortable and it makes sense until you meet Job. Because there's no one more righteous than Job, and then Job's going through the ringer. And so Eliphaz has come through. Yes, sir.
It also makes sense until you have a tragedy in your life.
Yeah, it makes sense until something happens to you. Yeah.
Then you know there ain't no answer.
That's right. Then there's no answer. So Eliphaz is the first friend to show up, and he comes in chapter 4, and he says, I think it's chapter 4, 9 through 12. He says, I've received a vision. And this vision made the hair stand up on my body. Yeah, I know it was from God. And it said, God blesses those who are good. God curses those who are bad. And so, Job, here's your issue. My religion, my relationship with God says that you've sinned. I don't know the sin necessarily. I can't point to it, but I know it's there. It's like someone, you come in and the doctor comes in and you have a fever, you've been nauseous, you're achy. The doctor looks at you and says, you had the flu. Well, did you really get that virus and look at it under a microscope? No. But all these symptoms together means you have a flu virus, and the doctor can do that. So Eliphaz says, I don't see the sin, but I see what's happened to you in life, and I know what my vision said, what God says, and so there you go. That's what's happened. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm just going to make a comment.
Yeah.
I read several years ago that when Jesus told the story about the rich man and Lazarus,
Yes.
it's possible that the people hearing the story were shocked because in their mind, along that same line of reasoning, in their mind, the rich man should have gone to Abraham's bosom, and Lazarus, because he did not have anything, should have gone to punishment. So the people basically said, no, you've got this backwards.
It was backwards to them, yeah. Well, Micah said, do you look at the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, whether it's a parable or not, you look at that story about the rich man and Lazarus, it messed people up because in their mind, you do right, you're blessed, you do wrong, it's bad. So how is Lazarus, a righteous man, living a life like this? And how is this rich man actually going to go to torment? They couldn't make sense of it. When Jesus talks to the man in Matthew 19, the rich young ruler says, sell everything you have and follow me. And the guy says, nope, I'm good, and leaves. You remember the apostles' reaction? They were, wait a second, God. Or wait a second, Jesus, this man is wealthy. And if he can't make it to heaven, then what about us? If this man is blessed by God and he can't make it, then obviously we're in trouble because they're looking at these outward symptoms. Jesus is looking at the heart. So yeah, those are good illustrations to bring here from the New Testament. Really good illustrations. So Eliphaz is diagnosing all these things. Now, we're going to look today for a few minutes at Job's reaction to what comes across here. But as we introduce that and begin to look at it, I want us to think about church hurt. And that sounds, moronic, I guess. It doesn't sound like something that those two words should go together. But there's some times where in the way that we work religiously, that we can hurt people and make it difficult for them to be Christian. I got a simple illustration in the notes. Younger lady, she's got kids. She's there alone at church. Her kids are acting crazy, right? Older lady is very, she feels sorry. And she remembers the day when she had kids. And she remembers that they were obnoxious sometimes when they were young. These are kids, just toddlers or whatever. And so the older lady says, I need to go encourage the younger lady. And she says, listen, I have been in your pew before. And being in your pew before, what you do is, how many of us have experienced this? The wooden spoon. All right. Now, any mothers in here? Did you have a wooden spoon? Did you have a fly swatter? What did you use to put the fear of God in your children? Anybody remember? Or anybody willing to admit? What'd you have, Gloria? Huh? Your hand. Yeah. She was in the Air Force. Whack. Military. Yeah. What'd you got, Debbie?
I had a grandmother that would tell me that my guardian angel would tell my mom when I was bad, and I always believed that.
All right, so a psyop. Yes, your grandmother would tell you your guardian angel is going to be mad at you. Okay, I like that. Okay. What I hear over there, huh? Oh, the pinch. Okay. The pinch. All right. Okay, so the older lady comes and she says, I've been in your chair. I can feel what you're going through. And so this is what I did to my kids. It's kind of a chuckle, and the younger lady chuckles. Well, next week, the kids are the same. Next week, kids are the same. And so the lady comes back and she's like, okay, you've got to discipline your kids. And if you don't discipline, they'll never be afraid of you. And if they're never afraid of you, they'll never respect you. You've got to raise your kids. You've got to be stern to make them sit. And the lady says, okay. Then at that time, she's running out the hall because one of the kids is crazy and has just run out. So she goes and brings them back. 3 or 4 weeks later, kid's still the same. She goes and she says, listen, you have got to do this. And she's a little bit more bold, a little bit more outspoken. You've got to do it this way. Okay, she doesn't realize the younger mother's crying because the younger mother, unlike the older mother, she's not married. She is just barely piecing things together, and it's almost an act of God they're even in church. The younger mother is having issues because it's so hard to keep up with all these kids, and she's been alone. She's been, been awake all night, all these other things. And as I put that illustration together, what I wanted to convey through it is there's sometimes when I look at somebody and, I'll say, I raised my kids to be pretty good. And if I did it, you can do it. But then I don't realize that they don't have the family structure that I had. And they don't have the background and the experience that I had. And they don't have the support of a whole congregation helping me raise my kids like I had. And so when I'm over there blasting somebody about their kids being crazy, I end up discouraging that person and making that person say, well, if my kids aren't going to behave and that really upsets this congregation, it would make everybody happier if I didn't bring them to church. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about church hurt. Sometimes because we don't have the whole story, we've got some good verses, but it's trouble. Yes, sir?
I'm sitting here reading this part here about Eliezer.
Eliphaz.
And your story there.
He had a mean mama named him Eliphaz. Yeah.
I sometimes wonder if we don't subconsciously do what he did to make ourselves feel good.
Right.
About the fact that I tried.
That's exactly what he's doing.
We're not trying to help the other person, but at the same time, we're doing it to make ourselves feel good about ourselves.
There's some times when I'm helping somebody, and I'm not using a personal illustration, I'm just using it in this colloquial way, where I'm doing it more for me and how it makes me feel. Well, I've got my ducks in a row, Yes, and sometimes that comes across in that way, and that's what's happening. So Eliphaz has a very simple, let me use this illustration, okay? My mind, for the longest time, saw the gospel mathematical equation, okay? It's rational. I read in my Bible, the plan of salvation. Hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized. I've heard that all my life. It is right here. And then I share the gospel, teach the gospel to someone, and they don't obey, and I'm like, what in the world? And I don't realize that some people are working from a different framework where they've always read the Bible in a different way. And it's going to take a while for them to understand. How some people, they're so busy, there's a family problem, a life problem, whatever else it may be. And yes, they're going to get to that point of salvation, but they've got to work through some things. There's some times where people have always thought something in a certain way, or maybe they're speaking against their parents or their grandparents. I know one fellow who says, I don't want to obey the gospel because that would send my grandmother to hell. Oh, it doesn't send your grandmother to hell. First of all, God determines however that happens. The only person I can fix is me, right? And if I see the gospel in a certain way, I should obey it. But a lot of times, as we go through, we'll find it's not really a mathematical equation because a lot of people are coming from a different context, a different journey, a different place. And so Eliphaz is here. He's very comfortable. His life is good. He has been an expert. And he comes to Job and he says, Job, this is why this is happening to you. And Job wants to say back, you don't even know what you're talking about. And yes, okay, you're listing off these sins, but you have absolutely no idea of what you're talking about. All right, last paragraph in the first page, because we got to fly a little bit, okay? People are not problems looking for a solution. Rather, they are what? They're individuals who need to be heard and need to be loved, okay? A lot of times we want to fix people. Did Job need to be fixed at this moment? No. He had a lot he needed to work through. He needed to be listened to. He needed to be loved. And Eliphaz is pulling out his toolkit and turning this screw and turning this knob and banging this bolt. And all that's ending up hurting Job and making it more difficult for him. They need to be listened to and they need to be loved. So look what 6, 14, and 15 say. Okay, I've got it quoted here. To the person who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even if he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. My brothers have dealt deceitfully. They're like a dried up brook, like streams of a brook that's dried up. He says in 6:28, know therefore, be pleased to look at me, for I would never lie to your face. All right, he says, I need someone to be kind. I need someone to listen to. I need someone to love me. Okay, let's go to the backside now. Job's asking questions that do not make him comfortable. Chapter 7, 4 and 7. We'd be a lot better if Job would just say, hey, okay, maybe I sinned in some way. Maybe there is some way I deserve it. And if Job would just shut up, everybody would be happy. But Job is honest enough to say this theology does not work. This theology is not what it needs to be. And that's one of the problems that you have sometimes is we don't like people who are uncomfortable. We don't like people who are coming out of addiction. We don't like people who are divorced. We don't like people who have certain histories or certain whatever. And it makes us uncomfortable. And sometimes we're more or less like, I'd really rather not even, just be in that pew, be quiet. Look there in chapter 7, verse 20. Job says, have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as a target so that I am a burden to myself? Okay? And so they're defending themselves as they go through. In 16:2, one of the classic verses of the book of Job. You are miserable comforters, okay? And your wind, that east wind that's coming from your mouth, it's never going to end. You ever meet somebody who you're like, man, it's windy and I wish that trap door would shut and we could just be a little still? Okay? Don't point at me on a long sermon. But these are miserable comforters. They're not helping us one bit. Okay? All right. Job understands his friend's motivations. But look what he says in 16:4. If my soul were in your place, I'd heap up words against you and shake my head at you. He's like, I know. If I was in your place, and Eliphaz, if this has happened to you, I would probably be preaching the same thing because this used to be my theology. This used to be what I think. That used to be who I was. But instead, 16:5, now that I've felt this, let me say I would strengthen you with my mouth. The comfort of my lips would relieve your guilt. 17:1, my spirit is broken. My days are extinguished. The grave is ready for me. But none of the friends will help. And so the very next verse says, none of the wise will comfort me in any way. All right, so he's being uncomfortable as he goes through. And chapter 23 begins what we're going to see through chapter 32. We'll get to that point. Where he says, my friends are not helping. I need an audience with God. And this is a very, very uncomfortable thing which is happening where he calls out for this audience with God. Because We know in our Bibles, do you win an argument against God? No. But Job is sitting here saying, none of this makes sense. And so I need God to show up and I need to have this discussion. Now, there's a song we sing that comes out of the book of Job. We'll read this eventually, okay? I know that my Redeemer lives, right? Great song, but it's taken out of context. Still a great song because as we think of it, we're not thinking of Job. We're just thinking of Jesus as our Redeemer. But what Job is saying is, God, if I could get myself in a courtroom, and if you, God, were over here and I were over here and we had a Redeemer or a judge, I could explain myself and I could explain to you how I don't deserve this, how this is really unfair and this should never have happened to me. And so he starts crying out, I want my Redeemer. I need a Redeemer who lives. I need one who stands there for me. Now, how does that work out when he gets to have this argument with God? We've read the book, doesn't work out too great, does it? God asked 43 questions, we still can't answer 22 of them. And here we are many centuries later. That's what happens at the end. But Job is here saying, God's not fair. This theology doesn't work. And everybody's saying, Job, you're not allowed to say that. But Job is very uncomfortable. In the church, sometimes we have to deal with discomfort. Because there's a lot of people who are going through life, and this arithmetic doesn't seem to make sense. What's happening in their life doesn't seem to make sense. But are people things that need to be fixed? No. What are they? People who need to be loved, people who need to be listened to, and people who need to be encouraged.